The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
And here now, in the great dustland of Unfogleaf, we find two hills covered in lush green grass. The hill of Harden Negden and Harden Nearneth, or so named the Hill of the Slain and the Hill of Tears. And while these alone bear grass within this dust-filled landscape, the reason behind that is terrible to behold.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today for with our great cold intro is Patrick Attenborough, I guess, or Patrick Mason.
Attenborough.
Attenborough, yeah. Hello, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
And Jeff Haecker. Hi there, Jeff.
Thomas.
So be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app. And you can find us on social media at Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, on X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And don't forget to get your official Secrets of Middle-earth gear and merch, including our awesome t-shirt, at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way for you to support our show and to show your love for Tolkien and the wonderful world of Middle-earth. So we are continuing our march through the Silmarillion, and from here on out, for the next few episodes of this, it's going to be all sadness all the time. We bring you today the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, or the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, I suppose. That's how Andy Serkis pronounces it in the audiobook, so I'm going with that. But before we get there, Jeff, you have some humorous news for us.
Yeah, so didn't really see any news this week about anything really new in the Tolkien world, but after I decided to rewatch the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the last few weeks, and as part of that, I was like, I'll watch War of the Rohirrim again at home, and so I watched it the other day, and we can finally confirm that Drummer Man does ride the tower down, and he's like sliding off as it hits, and then he flies off, and you don't see him again. I did post these pictures on the Discord, so if you've not seen those or want to see those are there. But yeah, he basically is on top, and as it's kind of tipping over, he kind of like slides down, and it looks like he's just going to like step onto the bridge or whatever. But then you see him like flying off. I guess he could be jumping off, but he looks like he's flying off in fear. So that's about all the news we have, but we can confirm Drummer Man, he at least survived the fall down, but when he got knocked off, I don't know.
That was still one of my favorite crazy moments of that movie. My brother and I almost died laughing at that part.
Yeah. And I will say, I really enjoyed watching that right before watching Two Towers, or within the same week, because it's in a lot of ways, it's almost the same. At least the Rohirrim stuff is almost the same plot. You have the Siege of Helm's Deep. You have to send word for riders through a magical means to come and save you, or break the siege or whatever. So and some of the nitpicks are still there, but I did overall really like watching it as part of the Jackson verse viewing. So I think moving forward, every time I watch, I'll probably do Fellowship, then War of the Rohirrim before Two Towers. So and yeah, you get to see Saruman saying he's going to be a friend of Rohan, which he obviously by the time of Rohirrim is not a friend of Rohan. So, or by the time of Two Towers is not a friend of Rohan. So, yeah, that's about all the news we had this week.
Yeah, very fun, very fun. I still have to watch that again, but I think it's on it's on Prime now. So
It's on Max at least streaming. It might be on Prime too. Max is kind of the home. They're like,
I think you can rent it
streaming
on
free.
Prime.
Yeah, I'm sure you can rent it pretty much anywhere. But at least if you have Max, it's included. But otherwise, you'd probably have to rent or something. But yeah, definitely give it a watch. I think it'll, if you didn't see it in theaters, definitely watch it. And I mean, it's definitely worth rewatching. And I still think it holds up and is entertaining. So
now, if only we can get some more news about that Gollum thing. So come on, guys.
It's going to be 5 movies now.
5 movies. Yeah.
And there's going to be a romance between.
Nope. I don't want to hear it.
Full stop.
No Gollum romance.
Does that count as our contractual reference already? Do we knock it out already?
I think it does, because we all
as bad as a bunch of barrels rolling down a stream. There you go.
All right, but before this derails too much, what did you guys think of this chapter overall? Because it's definitely one of the ones that when I read the Silmarillion the first time, there are several striking images in it that stuck in my memory afterwards. And when I would tell people about the Silmarillion's like most epic moments, several of them were from this chapter. What about you guys? What's your initial reactions to it? Stunned silence.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like. Yeah. You have a lot of, kind of for the most part, the elves do well, in most of the battles. And there's a lot of back and forth that goes on, a lot of sort of Morgoth getting the upper hand, the elves get the upper hand kind of a thing. And then, you have the dagger Bragaloth. And that ends poorly for the besieging Noldor. And then you have Beren and Luthien, which is a very uplifting tale. And they're sort of like coming off of that. I remember the first time reading this, it didn't really hit me like how devastating this battle was. And so it was very much kind of like a stunned silence, like, oh man, like they're basically ruined after this story. And in a lot of ways, it gets sort of subsumed into the very, very sad stories that come after this. Because you have, following on the heels of this, you have, our favorite guy ever, Turin. And then after that, you've got the fall of Gondolin and Nagathron and Doriath, and just sort of everything going to the waste. Sadly, all of Olmo's plans falling apart as he tries to save the Noldor. So it's sort of a stunned silence kind of a chapter.
Yeah, when I was reading this, I was like, this would be one I would love to see a limited series of this battle, but I think it would just end up being like 10 hours of battles more than anything. And it would be awesome. I would love to see that. But yeah, it is a very intense chapter, like you said. And it's one of the, I think it's one of the first that kind of brings in all these peoples of Middle Earth. You have elves, dwarves, and men all together fighting, for common cause at least for a time. I can't remember if there was dwarves in other parts like that were actually taking part in some of these battles that we've talked about. But they're definitely here, and I love the dwarf scene of when the king or their lord falls, they collect his body and sing a dirge and know on their march out, and no one will mess with them, not even the orcs or anyone else will mess with them, because they know if they do, they're gonna start hearing the dwarves count as they slay orcs in many numbers. But yeah, it is a very intense chapter, and very, it's cool in the sense of like a lot of intense stuff going on, and you would love to see kind of this action happening. But yeah, it is very sad overall, because like you said, you lose Fingon, you lose, the Noldor are kind of routed for a time. The remains of the Noldor, I guess, are kind of routed for a time, and you lose. This is kind of the fall starts to kind of be. I guess the Dagger Bragaloth was kind of the start, but this is really kind of where the war kind of starts to shift against, all these free people, which you kind of realize they're going to need some divine intervention, some, Deus Ex Luvatar, or, something to come in or Deus Ex Valor, I guess, to save them. So, and it was kind of interesting, which we can talk about when we get there, thinking of having read this and then watching Rings of Power, which talks about the Southlanders who served Morgoth. And I was just kind of jokingly thinking, okay, these are like the Southlanders we see in the show. These are their ancestors. Like, is one of these people like, Theo's great grandpa or whatever, some of those people. So, yeah. So that was just kind of funny to think about, but it's a good chapter.
Yeah, definitely one of the most metal chapters in Silmarillion. Like this and Fingolfin's great duel with Morgoth are probably the two of the most metal moments of the entire thing. This and the War of Wrath, obviously, but we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. Yeah. But yeah, like, there's just so many insane moments in this. But what's interesting to me is that how it begins with this kind of prologue of like catching up on like, what are Beren and Luthien doing? There's this kind of very, pleasant, like, but still sort of actually bittersweet kind of prologue where, it mentions, how Beren and Luthien have gone off to live in Assyriand near the Green Elves and stuff. And it talks about Luthien's last parting with her mother, Melian the Maya, and her grief over having that now that her daughter shares the fate of men, there's kind of this ontological difference between them now.
Yeah, that was something that struck me. It's in a lot of ways, it feels very much like the reverse of the Nephilim story we get in the Bible, right? Because we have, a lot of interpretations of that story have basically fallen angels, mating with humans and then producing these creatures, the Nephilim. And in a way, you can think if you twist that story or turn it around, I shouldn't say twist it, you should say turn it around and take it from a light side. So what does that look like? So you have this marriage between Melian, who's effectively an angelic creature, and Thingol, and from that you get Luthien. And so Luthien is kind of this creature that was sort of between worlds in the first place. And then she's chosen this third path to be immortal, which she wasn't even part of that world. And she's one of the few beings that sort of gets to like have at least her toe dipped in every single flavor, I guess, of type of creature, typologically speaking. I also find it very interesting that her touch erases the winter of Thingol, which is, what his sorrow is called. And then the sort of eye gaze with her mom causes the sorrow of Melian. And it's sort of this like one parent is, comforted while the other parent, sort of goes into despair. It's sort of it's an interesting interplay between, how the parents viewed the situation and what's going to happen. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool vignette.
Yeah. And it also talks about how no mortal man sees Beren again. Like, so I don't know if that means that, immortal creatures like elves saw him and, knew him and was friends with them, but
because he
says like no one of his own. Yeah. And no one of his own kind sees him, which I guess he's the last of the Edain, or, at least of his house anyway. So, he doesn't really have any family left, but it was, it's interesting that he found an elf and married an elf who became human and then became basically neighbors and friends with elves after that. But basically how they kind of just fade into obscurity, because that's kind of the fate of men, to not, you can die and do great things. Or you can or you can just, die in kind of a normal way, and not everyone's going to die in the big battle or anything. In this case, Beren didn't. He just kind of like probably got to old age and passed away. And I don't know if it says, I can't remember if it says how old he is, but I don't know if kind of he's one of the longer lived or if he's not long lived yet because he doesn't have the elven that elven blood or anything. But so I'm assuming he lives kind of a normal lifespan compared to maybe Luthien lives a little bit longer, but she's going to be taken on. They're both going to go off to be taken to the heart of Iluvatar. So Melian and Thingol, when he's re-embodied later, because Thingol's not making it out of the story. Spoiler alert. They'll never see her again. At least in a way that we know of. Because we don't know what happens to men after they die. They're taken to the heart of Iluvatar, and we don't know beyond that. Whereas the elves are, sundered from, or eventually live all sundered from Middle Earth or from Arda. So.
Yeah, and we also get the first mention here of Dior, who is Beren and Luthien's son, and we'll see more of him later in the context of more tragic events. But
I was just laughing because of his name. I was like, someone needs to start a Tolkien perfume line called Dior and try to compete with the actual perfume Dior.
Dior.
Or Dior, does a Tolkien line of perfume or something, or cologne or something.
The scent of Doriath, I guess.
It's mysterious.
I can see that in the commercial. But yeah, it quickly transitions after that to the building of this alliance that you referenced earlier, Jeff, the Union of Maethros. So Maethros, of course, being the eldest son of Feanor. He's kind of the de facto leader of the brothers, and him and his brothers basically take a lot of encouragement from Beren and Luthien's feat of wresting a Silmaril from Morgoth, because they realize, Morgoth's not unassailable, as the book says. Like he has a chink in his armor. Well, if they could do it with just the two of them, we should be able to do it with an army. But I think they're missing the point of how singular and fated Beren and Luthien's mission was. I think that they took the wrong. I think that Maethros took the wrong lesson from that escapade. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's the opposite of the stealth mission that Beren and Luthien were on. He's because he didn't pay attention. Like, they snuck in. They used Luthien's magic or the magic of whatever, elven magic there to take on the appearance of those, the two creatures to get in. He's like, no, we're just going to, it's like the opposite of what they do in Return of the King, where they're trying to intentionally draw Sauron's eye while Frodo and Sam and Gollum, I guess, sneak into Mordor. They're trying to intentionally, there's no subtlety. He's just, we're going to go knock on the front door of Angband and try to get Morgoth out to fight, which didn't work for Fingolfin, so it's probably not going to work for anyone else.
Yeah.
Really only work for the Valar in a couple chapters.
He seems to get this idea, but I kind of like where he goes with it in this concept that we've all got to be together or we're going to be utterly crushed. And he's right. Unfortunately, he's also dumb. he before this he went and ticked off Thingol.
Right. And the actions of Celegorm and Curufin have basically ticked off everybody. Thingol, so they're not getting it because they tried to kidnap Luthien, so they're not getting any help really from Doriath except Beleg and Moblung and a few other guys. They're not getting any help from Nargothrond because they tried to overthrow the king and basically sent our boy Finrod to his death. So they have basically ticked off
my boy Finrod.
Oh yeah, You're exactly. So they have basically ticked off everybody. The alliance is not as strong as it could be. That's the first problem.
Yeah, it's just always the interplay of the doom, right? It's sort of it's hilarious, how much purchase Morgoth gets off of this doom, even though he's not that's not his doing, right? He benefits so much from this doom because we see it effectively play out at the beginning of this and then at the end. And it's more or less you know, at least from the book saying like why this doesn't work, is because of the constant backbiting effectively that happens amongst the elves, the lack of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it even talks about how the sons of Fëanor, they want to get the Silmarils back from Thingol because they're like, these are ours by right of, they were our fathers, but you know, Thingol doesn't want to give them back because he prizes and cherishes them, and you know is obsessed with them. And in kind of in his defense a little bit, he also is like, this was won through the blood of, you know, a baron, and it's not something I'm going to easily give up because of that. But I think it's more the, you know, the doom of getting tied into the Silmarils.
Yeah.
Well, because you have Melian advising him to take him up, to give them the Silmaril, like, and it's yet another time Thingol doesn't take his wife's advice.
Yeah, exactly. Kinda. You chose poorly. Mandos is off in the corner.
Yeah, it's like he should just like he should just live rent free in Doriath, Mandos, because there's so much doom connected stuff going on there.
And there's halls. It's built for him, basically.
Yeah, it's the underground halls. He'll like it there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It can be a summer home. You know,
exactly.
When he needs a break.
Yeah,
he just has a rocking chair next to the fire in the corner.
Yeah.
That's a reference to an upcoming Secrets of Movies and TV show about the Searchers.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now I remember. Yes. But yeah, aside from Mandos's potential Valar B&B at Doriath, they do manage to get a fair amount of people to show up for this. You know, they get Fingon, the High King, on board. And so Fingon, if I'm remembering right, he's Fingolfin's son, I think, because Fingolfin was the last High King. He's killed in the duel with Morgoth. Yep. So he's Fingolfin's son and Turgon's brother. Turgon's the king of Gondolin, and they actually get like Turgon to commit to this. He doesn't show up right away to the battle, but he
doesn't tell anybody. He sneaky commits.
Right.
10,000 elves.
Right, yeah. But they also get, you know, other races on board. They've got the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. They've got men in the form of both the Edain and Easterlings, who I guess have now shown up in Beleriand now. And so they've got these two essentially like not races really, but like peoples of men, you know, on board. So, you know, they've got a substantial force. It's just, unfortunately, it's just not going to be enough. I mean, this is Thangorodrim we're talking about here. This is Angband, right? The Hells of Iron. You're not breaking into this place.
Yeah.
It's not simply walk into Angband.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Unless you're Baron and Luthien, then you can just simply walk in. But and also that they mentioned, this was interesting, that like Morgoth has sent out spies, and it doesn't really elaborate on who these spies are. Like, are they Maiar who have taken the form of people and like are spying out, or are they elves that he is captured and daunted with that spell of unrelenting terror thing where he basically gets you to do his bidding by force? But either way, he's got inside information on the order of battle here. So that's not good. Yeah.
I like to think it's our boy Adar from Rings of Power somewhere in there too. He's one of the spies, and
maybe.
You
know, yeah, he might be. It kind of feels to me sort of like it's sort of just everything, right? Because at this point, Morgoth effectively is unchecked, right? They went from this where they were kind of containing the sea, you know, around Angband, and then you have the dam burst, which is the flamethrower out the door of Thangorodrim, and now they're kind of in this like. It's like kind of a Pirates of the Caribbean feel to it. Like there are places that you know are for sure they're okay, like Doriath and Hithlum are still being protected, and Midras' tower, right? But there's other places that you don't want to go because the pirates are there, or the English, or whoever you're fighting against. And that's kind of the feel. And so like the spies are just, they don't have to try. They could just wander abroad, and it's not like it was before where they had to sneak out the back of Thangarodrim and loop around through the north and all that. So the ability of Morgoth to do what he does best, which is divide and conquer, is just amped up to an nth degree.
And it's almost like in their very order of battle, they lay this out for him on a silver platter, because the attack is two-pronged, right? So you've got, if you're looking at a map of Beleriand, you've got Fingon and his forces on like the left side, so that would be the west. And then coming on the right from the east are Mithros and the Sons of Feanor and their guys. So you've got these two wings who are going to converge, but then he can just deal with these two advancing columns almost one by one, or piecemeal, or like he doesn't, like, they're not putting all their strength into like the tip of the spear here. They've already divided their forces. So, I mean, part of that is geography, but like there's a lot of mountains in the way and junk, but it's almost like Angban's got one gate and all he needs to do is send this huge force out the gate, and they're like trying to do this two-pronged thing. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work. He'll hold down one while smashing the other,
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to, do the Schlieffen plan from World War I of like, we're going to try to, come around the back and trap him in the middle. But he's already, he's in the most powerful fortress ever right now. And, where he is. He can unleash his forces at any time. Attacking from the sides isn't really going to do anything. Like it's, these stories are just showing that really you're no created being, or created by the Valar type of being, is going to be able to stop Morgoth. They're going to need the aid of the Valar, but they have to get to a point where they're so desperate that they're willing to, that the people are willing to do, forfeit their lives, or at least a certain character is willing to forfeit his life to go and seek their aid, because the Valar, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know. I guess they're just like, well, this is part of the doom of the Noldor, and everyone's getting ensnared in it, and even we can't do anything about it until they can. So I don't know.
They could do something about it. They just won't. Like they're like, it's almost like tough love, right? They're like, you've got to, reap the consequences of what you've done. Like, go stand in a corner. So
yeah, but it's very reminiscent of the Israelites not being allowed to come into the Holy Land, right? It's sort of the, they're disobedient to God. They come up to the Holy Land and they quail at the idea of going in, even though they have the Lord at their back. And he's like, all right, you know what? You're not coming in. Go wander in the desert for 4 years. Once you're all dead, I'll let your kids in.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because we just had the ending of that in the Sunday readings, where they, as we're recording this last Sunday on Laetare Sunday, they finally enter after all that time. Yeah.
It's Joshua and Caleb are the only ones left. Like,
right. The faithful ones.
Now we get to go in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it just strikes me as very much the same kind of a thing, that they're just sort of like, well, you guys, you can't do this now. Like, and you have to suffer the consequences of what your actions were, before, we can bring you back.
I think they're also waiting for repentance too. It's like, we can't, it's almost, again, referencing the readings from last Sunday. It's almost like the prodigal son. He's not accepted back until he actually repents and goes back with, and and actually makes a show of repentance. Whereas, like, you know, a lot of the Noldor are simply going to be too proud to seek the aid of the Valar. And, you know, so they're just like, you know, they're waiting for someone who's showing up as a sincere emissary to say, look, we're throwing ourselves at your mercy here.
Yeah. It's, you know, I think there's several lines from several Psalms that talk about the Lord breaking down. You know, the Lord has broken my bones and now he's going to mend them, or he's, you know, torn me apart and now he's going to knit me back together. And it is a necessary process, you know, and the elves aren't quote unquote mortal, but they are, you know, living, and they do exist in a physical world. And when you do exist in a physical world and you have sinned, like, there has to be a recompense. And it's not just a spiritual one. A lot of the times there's a lot of like mental and physical stuff that has to happen too. Mm-hmm. And so this is sort of the playing out of what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't it from the Bible? I can't remember which part of the Bible it's from. It might be from one of the Psalms that, you know, he who sows the wind reaps the whirlwind. I believe that's a biblical reference.
I think so.
It is. I just can't remember where it's from. I almost want to say it's a prophet like Jeremiah or Isaiah.
Yeah, it sounds like that. Well, and there's the other thing too of if the Valar intervene, it's almost like then they're going to be expected to always solve everybody's problems, which, as you see in the Akalabeth later, like the Valar did a good thing in eventually, you know, stopping Morgoth, but then not, you know, a couple thousand years later or however long, you know, the people try to take what they shouldn't, you know, and it all, you know, I don't know if it's all kind of tied to the doom of what happened, and, you know, tracing back to what happened when Morgoth first stole the Silmarils, because all the events happened because, like, that was kind of the precipitating event that led to, you know, a man becoming, you know, marrying an elf and introducing that Maiar blood into the human, you know, into the human bloodline. So, yeah, and you have because like I said, the Valar have to eventually intervene, but then they're going to be so in despair at what happens in the Akalabeth that, you know, they give up they have to give it up to a higher power anyway, so that they can't even ultimately solve everything. So right. I think it's like it's a dangerous, like, if you invoke the super powerful beings and they help you, it's always gonna be like, well, what about, it's like if you have a friend who's rich and you're not, and you're like, can you help me out? You know, send me $20, and you know, well, you have a lot of money, you can send me, you know, pay my rent this month. You know,
it's the Superman problem, right?
Yeah.
If Superman keeps saving the world, the danger is that people become dependent on Superman to fix all their problems, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, and I did look it up. The reference is Hosea 8:7.
Okay. So
it is from one of the prophets, yeah. But I mentioned the order of battle before. So you have the two-pronged attack of Fingon on one hand and then Mithros. And then, like you mentioned, Pat, you've got kind of the stealth appearance of Turgon and his 10,000 fighters. But I love that moment because it was sort of unexpected. And Fingon has this great line. He says it in Elvish, but then it's translated, the day has come. So, like, he's got this unexpected boost of support of extra fighters. So he's really confident we can do this. But, you know, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and the whole scheme, like you're talking about, Thomas, relies on Morgoth to come out. Yeah. Right. And he does to a certain extent, but he doesn't have to. Like, that's the crazy. I just feel like nobody, and I feel like the dwarves should have been good at this by this point, because they've had their own wars going on between their clans. But it's like nobody's good at this whole siegecraft thing. Like, they had the Leaguer of Angband or of Morgoth, but they didn't actually siege Thangarodrim. They weren't hurling rocks at it, trying to knock it down or you know, breaking it. They just, we're going to hang out outside of this plane and basically make a wall and kill any orcs we see. And I'm like, that's not a siege.
No,
just needed to build a giant siege tower with a drummer on top that could crash down on top of it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's almost like what they were doing is kind of like the wall in Game of Thrones. They're just watching and waiting for an attack to happen and making sure that bad guys don't get through, but they're not actually laying siege to anything.
Right. It's and shocking that J.R.R. Martin would have taken that and made it into something else. But
I know, right? Yeah.
Shocked, I say. Shocked.
But he does come out and he sends out a parley, a group of people to talk. And it reminded me kind of like the parley at the end of Return of the King, where you've got the mouth of Sauron and all that. But they basically they bring out this, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. They bring out this elf who's known to one of the princes of Nargothrond. He's like his brother, I think. And they basically just kill him in front of everybody. And I'm like, so the whole parley is it's a masterstroke on Morgoth's part, because it is a ruse in order to enrage the elves and get them to, do a full frontal assault on the gate, which they do. They play right in. He plays them like a fiddle. And but although Fingon's counterstroke, it almost goes awry, because Fingon's counterstroke they almost get through the gate.
Yeah. And they get through the gate.
They get right.
They just don't get any further than that.
They don't get any further than like the threshold or like his foyer, I guess. I don't know. Well,
basically, yeah.
Yeah. But they say Morgoth trembled. Yeah. Morgoth trembled when they got to the gate and were able to get through, because he's like, oh, crap. This could have been a bad idea. But on its but he knows he has probably thinking of strength.
Yeah, well, he was probably thinking of Fingolfin, about how he got wounded and hurt by by this mere elf when he's a mighty Valar. So he's probably has that in his mind of this happened and it could happen again if I'm not careful. And he had just had the Silmaril stolen too, so he's feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
For maybe one of the first times.
And we know he's weaker because he's been pouring out all of his angelic power into all his monsters and stuff, so he's less physically powerful than he used to be.
And I love the lead up to this, to the finally when they break and they do the charge, because is it Huron or is it Huor who keeps saying, no, we don't charge. We wait for the signal from Hydros. No. And you just see that, that scene, and I don't remember what movie it's from, but I know one of you's got it. He's just yelling at everybody, hold!
Oh, Braveheart.
Yeah, Braveheart, yeah. Hold! Yeah. Just see him yelling that over and over again. And then finally they break and go for it. But, it's just nobody have a battering ram. I don't know.
The movie I was thinking of was actually Gettysburg on the third day, Pickett's charge, right? Yeah. It's like the high water mark. They get right up to Union lines, and they are so close to overwhelming Union line, and then they get pushed back because they had taken too many losses on the way in. And they're not able to turn the Union's artillery against them, and instead they get it. And so it's it's that moment where it's like they reach this high watermark, they get to the gate, and they end up being pushed back with huge losses, just like Lee's army at Gettysburg. There's at the end of that battle, and they're like, what Lee says to his generals, well, what happened to your division? He's like, I have no division. It's destroyed.
Yeah.
You get that same epic scale of entire, formations of elves being annihilated, in this. And I mean, that's why I think it's called the Unnumbered Tears. And they mention that specifically in the context of the Eldar and the Edain being beaten back from the gate and enduring all of these casualties.
Yeah, and that's even before Glaurung comes out and does his thing to burn them all alive too.
Right, he sends out Glaurung again.
Yeah, because this is basically day one, right? Is the elves get to the gates, and then Morgoth unleashes the counteroffensive, the orc counteroffensive, and that beats them back. And then day two, you have Maedhros finally showing up.
Right, because he's been delayed. He's been delayed by essentially by treason.
Right.
These Easterlings
saying, hey, we're going to get attacked. We're going to get attacked.
Mm-hmm. Right, but finally Maedhros, as you mentioned, like he shows up on the second day after being delayed, and Turgon, and there was this other thing too, where like Turgon and Fingon meet in battle, so it's a cool moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. Morgoth got the first. He was able to delay the second prong, Maedhros' group, and is able to deal with Fingon and Turgon's wing on its own, and just and then so he messes up the coordination of the whole battle. But Morgoth spends a lot of orcs, I guess, on this battle because like he has to lose his last reserves. I think he wanted to do this just with orcs and trolls and stuff, but he's basically forced to release Glaurung, the other dragons, because there's more by this point, and the Balrogs. And you get the sense that he didn't want to do that.
Yeah. It's also interesting from a tactics perspective. He sends the dragons against the force that has the Nogrim, or the dwarves.
Oh yeah,
who they're paired up against. Like if you were planning this out on a tabletop, that's who you'd want. You'd want your dwarf divisions against the dragons. And he sends the Balrog against Fingon, which is another interesting piece of tactics because Maedhros has actually fought this Balrog, before.
Oh, right.
And he's got a grudge against him. Effectively lost a hand and a dad to this guy. And so you see this sort of, it's a tactical miscue, but it may have been purposeful just to keep Gothmog out of the way of Maedhros.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're going to get this feeling that there's a chance that, and this always occurs to me whenever we go through this, is the tragedy of Feanor. If he was just a little more level-headed, maybe he'd still be around. And maybe he'd have a Silmaril, right? Because him and his kids wouldn't have cheesed off Thingol. And like, what kind of monster in battle would he be against Morgoth's forces, or even against Morgoth? And then you're just like, but you died, because you couldn't restrain yourself.
We might not even be here at this point because it might have been him dueling Morgoth instead of Fingolfin.
Right.
So yeah, that'd be a great what if, and I'm sure videos exist like exploring like the what ifs of that, because like, oh yeah, that's such a neat question. What if Feanor survived? But yeah, it's and he also has his fifth column though, Morgoth, in some of these treacherous Easterlings. And it mentions, though, that not all of these Easterling men are actually in on it. I think the one guy, Bor, I think his name was, actually, he stays loyal. But Ulfang and his sons are basically on the pay of Morgoth, and they start fighting in the rear of Maedhros's group. So now you've not only having to deal with the assault of the dragons, coming in front of you, but you've also got the enemy in your own camp, essentially.
Yeah. Maedhros is basically suddenly fighting a three-front war. He's got the orcs kind of between him and Fingon. He's got the dragons and other monsters coming at him from Thangorodrim, and now he's getting hit in the back by by the men who hung out with Currafin and back when where they settled in those lands. Shocking, nobody.
Yeah, shocking. Yeah. They were the vassals of the most like egregiously awful of the brothers. Yeah.
And now you're the Germans in World War II, and you're fighting, a multi-front war that you shouldn't have started because, or you should have planned better, and you maybe could have won one of the fronts. But you just have to attack the most dangerous place, and you're gonna
even in World War One, like they never they never learned from that. It was just like
no one's ever learned from attacking Russia, like all the way back in history.
Never started a land war in Asia.
Right. Exactly.
Invade Russia in the winter.
Right. In this case, you don't attack Angband in this way. Like, you essentially need the Valar for this going to work.
Yeah.
But you have like that, as you mentioned, Jeff, like that I think both Jeff and Pat, you've mentioned this, but that last stand of the dwarves against Glaurung and the dragons. And you have that great duel between Glaurung and Azaghal, who's like I think he's the king of Belagost. But that was just great. Yeah. And they mentioned the masks, those that we see in Rings of Power, those fighting masks of the dwarves that they have, and also that their armor and weapons can withstand dragon fire, which is great. And then when Glaurung tries to crush Azaghal just pulls out a knife and thrusts up into his belly, revealing, mild spoilers for later, but revealing what will be a recurring problem for Glaurung, his vulnerable belly. But
really any dragon, because Smaug is the same.
Right. Yeah. But that was just such a great scene, and the death of Azaghal and that dirge, the funeral dirge, where they're bearing him away. His pallbearers are bearing him away, and not even the orcs will touch them. That's just great. Yeah. That's metal. Like that's got to be one of the best dwarf moments in the Legendarium, actually.
Yeah, that would be awesome to get like Bear McCreary to put that to song, or to write that dirge. And I'm sure there's probably someone out there who's written a metal song version of that. But this whole thing would, like I was saying, would be an awesome like mini series or movie or something of just getting to see this huge battle just take place. And I mean, it would just be, I love the battles in the Lord of the Rings movies, but I know that's only part of the story, but this would be like the whole story would be the battles, and I would love it to see it all play out on screen.
It's like 6 days of battle. So you could do like same thing that you did with Gettysburg, where it's a multi-part series. You could do that. And I think it would work really well, because like you basically go from these set pieces from one to another, because you have Maedhros' force basically evaporates, and Maedhros and the other sons of Feanor make it away, but they're kind of, at that point, they're sort of dissipated into the elven population at large, more or less living on the run in southern Beleriand at that point. And so Turgon and Fingon's forces are sort of left alone to face the Orc Horde and the Balrogs, and things don't go well, unfortunately.
No. Yeah, you have the duel of Fingon and Gothmog, and we've seen him before, as you mentioned, Pat. Like he kills Feanor, captures Maedhros. But I know we want to read out the actual death of Fingon, because this moment stuck with me. And I remember, because it's so visceral and so well described. It literally is visceral. There's viscera in this scene.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best use of prose we see, but there's so many good ones in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before you read it, it's almost reminding me of the death of Achilles from the Odyssey, or from the
Iliad.
Iliad. It's like you have the one hero who's of not Death of Achilles, death of
Hector.
Death of Hector. Who's standing to try to save his home, save his family, and just getting destroyed by Achilles. So it was giving me, it was definitely kind of reminding me of that. So I don't know if there was any kind of inspiration there, but from Tolkien, but
yeah, I could definitely see that. All right. At last, Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog, until another Balrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood.
They trod it into the mire of his blood. That's the image that stuck with me, where I was like, that is wow. Because that literally means that they kind of just beat him to a pulp.
Yeah.
And then trampled him into the ground, probably like marching over his body and stomping him into the ground.
Yeah. They didn't just kill him. They destroyed his body. Yeah.
And it's such a poetic image of sort of the fall of the Noldor, right? That you have his banner, the blue and silver banner kind of the Noldor, getting ground into the ground and covered in blood. And it's probably one of the most poetic stanzas that we see in the Silmarillion as an expression of the result of the doom. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what you're buying. Yeah. Like, if Mandos could have like showed them, like, this is what you're buying with this. This is how this ends for you. Do you still want to leave?
Here's your life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was shocking the first time I read it. That was a shocking scene. That and the death of Fingolfin were just like, and to the point where I think after I read it the first time, I conflated the two moments. Because Fingolfin also gets stepped on by Morgoth.
Right. They both effectively get crushed by the power of Morgoth. Mm-hmm. We don't find out. I don't think it necessarily says how the Balrogs kill or, mortally wound Feanor. But I have to assume there was some crushing going on. Like, it just seems to be their way of like, not only have I killed you, but like, this is the stamp I'm putting on you. Yeah.
Literally the stamp. I'm just going to step on you until you like, ugh. I
mean, because that's what Glaurung does to the Dwarven King. I mean, it's just like, this is the tactic. You put their weight on them and then you press down.
Right. Yeah. Just crush. Yeah. Like, and I wonder where the heck is Sauron in all this mess? We are not. Where is he still healing himself from the battle with Huon? He might be, because he's not.
I would say he's off to the side telling the Balrogs what to do. He's like, go over there, go smash him, go smash. Like, but he's not getting his own, his own hands dirty.
Right. Yeah. He's very conspicuous by his absence. Yeah. Like, they don't even say like he's down in the depths of Angband advising Morgoth or whatever. He's just, they don't even mention him.
Yeah. He's off licking his wounds somewhere.
But yeah, the men, the men who are still loyal to the elves, they don't escape, this disaster either. Because basically Turgon is now effectively the High King because his brother Fingon has died. So he's effectively inherited the High Kingship. And they're like, okay, our first priority, they're almost like the Secret Service. They're like, our first priority is to get you out, Turgon. You've got to escape. You're essentially the last hope of the Noldor. So they're brothers, right? Húrin and Huor. They brothers or cousins?
I think so. One or the other, I can't remember.
Right, but they both of them have been to Gondolin before, and so they're already friends of Turgon. So they essentially do a rear guard holding action to allow Turgon to escape, and it's through this muddy, sort of swampy ground, the Fen of Serech, it's called. And both these characters, their sons are going to be important later, because Hurin, of course, is the father of Turin, who we'll meet in a few weeks, and Huor is the father of Tuor, who we'll meet a few weeks after that. Both of whom become important men in the later Silmarillion. But and it's interesting to hear Huor's prophecy, because Huor kind of does this with the eyes of death kind of prophecy. He knows he's going to die, and so he makes this prophecy of he tells Turgon, look, you've got to escape, and he says a new star will arise from you and from me. And I won't say any more about that because it's a big spoiler.
Yeah. And yeah, they're brothers who both marry into the House of Beor. Like they're from other Eddine houses, but they're from a different Eddine house, but they both marry into the House of Beor.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like all the houses basically end up merging by the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love that idea of the prophecy and, Turgon being able to get out and not seeing like the fulfillment of that until like decades later, which is great. But and both these brothers end up being killed in their rearguard action. And Hurin has this another like really metal moment. What they say, he killed like 70 trolls or something. It was some insane number. Like he gets to the point where he just drops his shield and then starts wielding his axe two-handed, and he kills 70 of them before he finally falls, because they keep grabbing him and he cuts their hands off, but their hands stay on him. Mm-hmm. And every time he swings with his axe and kills a guy, he shouts, "The day shall come again," which is a reference to Fingon's battle cry at the beginning of the battle. The day has come. So he keeps saying, "The day shall come again." They say his axe smoked black, like it started to dissolve and smoke in the troll blood. Again, like
yeah,
that's incredible. Yeah. Like another image that sticks with you.
And yet again, Gothmog shows up and takes him prisoner.
Poor Hurin. He's gonna wish he was dead in a little bit.
Yep.
He gets taken, and they said that Morgoth like literally like orders Hurin's capture. Like Hurin's done so much damage just by himself. He's like, I want that dude alive.
Yeah, because he got Turgon out, and I know he knows Turgon, and I need to get Turgon now because he's the High King.
Right.
And I'm still a little iffy about this line of elves whose forebearer was able to actually hurt me.
It's amazing how insecure he is. He's achieved this overwhelming victory, and he's like, Turgon's escaped. And I'm like, what? Okay. Like,
yeah. Well, and it speaks to sort of what we see at the very beginning of all of this is, Morgoth kind of at his might, at the strongest he can be. And then slowly over time, as he sort of dissolves the power out of him and he goes into the duel and gets hurt, and he just loses face and he loses power and he loses ability. And by the time he achieves his ultimate victory, he's now sort of this like limping, wounded, half-crowned, won't leave his house, paranoid old man. It's like, here's your victory. Like, this is what it costed you.
Mm-hmm. You're right, because the doom has cost the elves so much, but it's also cost Morgoth a lot.
Yeah. This is the price you're paying for being in charge.
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned is divide and rule tactics, and it's worked on a psychological level too, because he's estranged men and elves now at this point. And while they'll trust some men, the three houses of the Edain, because of the treachery of some of the Easterlings, they'll basically never trust men as a whole again. And that you see the beginning of the two kindreds growing apart.
And if we take Rings of Power to some level of canon, you see them, they're thousands of years later, they're still watching the Southlands because they know that these, there's ostensibly they're watching for the return of, Sauron or whatever. But I mean, one of their goals is they're checking in on the men to make sure no one's, up to no good and getting back to the old ways of worshiping Morgoth. Like, and there was, in that show, there was the kind of that Morgoth cult with, I think it was Waldrig, was the guy. Who,
I did like that idea of the proto Mordor, like being this essentially giant prison camp for men who had joined Morgoth, because like it is perfectly shaped if you wanted to make it a giant prison. It's surrounded on three sides by mountains. On the other side is like this barren desert. So like all you need to do, if you have people who you want to watch over, Mordor would be the perfect place to put them, even before it was a volcanic, wasteland. You could essentially just park people there, put towers at a few strategic points, and then essentially make it a giant concentration camp, which is what the elves basically did, like a giant ghetto for these people. But yeah, I did like that idea because like we know from the Silmarillion that, some of the men did join Morgoth. So there would have to be fallout from that.
Yeah. Well, and you see, like, this is our second Gil-galad shows up, and him and Círdan managed to escape because Morgoth, it's like once she achieves the end of the Neonathar Nordian, and I know I pronounce it differently. Excuse me. The Neonathar Nordian. So in my mind, every time I say that or hear that, like it's just this picture of like this wasteland of a battle with like an elven girl with her like hair blowing in the wind and like a metal riff playing in the, like
I just think of it like in anime when it's like after the battle there's a single sword stuck in the ground with a ribbon on it and you see the wind, there's wind and dust blowing and and like you said, like an anime, like a 90s anime metal riff, like blowing, or early 2000s riff. So
Ooh, did that come through on the microphone? Oh wow,
is that thunder?
Yep.
Okay.
So Morgoth is telling me we may have to wrap this up soon.
He escaped from the void.
Yeah, he escaped from the void and is now thundering over my house.
He's angry that we're pointing out his victory wasn't that victorious.
Yeah.
But it, you get the stage set for the rest of the stories, like the destruction of Nevrast, the destruction of the havens that are in the north, and everybody having to move to the Bay of Balfolas to then send out stuff. The reattempts by Turgon to establish some sort of communication with Valinor. What we have for Tuor and Turin's stories being set up now, and it's all coming, it's all kind of come to a head, and the rest of this is all sort of just what happens to the rest of the hidden kingdoms and how do they fall.
And of course it brings us back to the beginning with the mound of the slain, as you mentioned, Pat, the heaps of bodies and skulls and armor that just gets lifted up into these huge mounds, which I remember in the beginning in the little opening montage and season 1 of Rings of Power, they actually show those. There was that huge mound of bodies and helmets and Galadriel was there. Yeah. She's not there in the book, but obviously.
Well, and just thinking about in contrast to like in Lord of the Rings, when they're trying, is trying to divide the peoples, the free peoples. He's trying to get Rohan destroyed first, so that it can't help Gondor, because he knows these two are the biggest threat, and if I take them out, but it's kind of the opposite, and Rohan is not destroyed and can then show up at Pelennor Fields and be there at the Black Gate to ultimately lead to Sauron's defeat, but again, it's not through their military might. So I think that's a contrast there. They're trying to defeat the evil one through just straight military power, and that's just not going to work. It may work for a time, like in the Last Alliance when they defeat Sauron, but it's not going to work forever. You need, some kind of, that divine will of Iluvatar situation to get kind of, it's like to reference the Bible. It's, God is not in the raging wind, but in the subtle, in the subtle breeze. Like, you need the hobbits ultimately to defeat Sauron, but you have to, it's not just military might. There's other factors too. So I think, whereas this, like we said, it's just them trying to assail only with military might. Like, they could have sent a small, like Beren and Luthien, they could have tried to do some kind of sneaky thing to get somebody in to, take out Morgoth or something, but they're just like, nope, we're just going to sit here and just attack, and just, it's ultimately going to fail.
Yeah. All right. So do we have any wrap up thoughts about the Nirnaeth I can't even say it now. The Nirnaeth Arnoediad, or whatever it is.
Nirnaeth Arnoediad.
Nirnaeth Arnoediad. I like that we get words from Morgoth in this. This is one of the few times we actually hear Morgoth speak when he's talking to Hurin. And it just shows how petty he is. And kind of like in every version of that word, he is this petty king of a sad kingdom. And you have to question, like, what did Morgoth actually want? Way back when he was, an Ainur, before he became a Valar. Like, what if he had his way and had his ability to order everything the way he wanted to, Melkor, would it have been a happy place? Like, it just, this is one of those things. It points out that, like, the evil will beget evil, even if it doesn't want to. Like, even if his idea was everybody is in happiness and they're all serving me, because of the evil he does, all he gets back is evil. And so he visits this upon Hurin, and effectively Turin and Hurin's whole family. And it's just this sad, petty thing that it's kind of Morgoth in a nutshell.
It is, yeah.
You went from, like, darkening the world and, stealing the best creations of all time to, making a guy watch his kids live terrible lives. Like, bravo, slow clap of condescension.
The only other thing I was going to say is I was kind of flipping through the chapter here. There's a part about, this goes back to Morgoth fearing Turgon and the House of Fingolfin. But it says that in the kind of the second to last, little section before Pat's, your intro, it says, and most of all his kin, Morgoth feared Turgon, for of old in Valinor, his eye had lighted upon him. And whenever he drew near, a shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden from Turgon, ruin should come to him. So that just, as I was just kind of reading that, caught my eye, and it's just interesting because Turgon is going to, Fingolfin is the one that wounded him, but he has this sense of that Turgon's going to, cause him problems in the future. So, but we don't quite know what that will be yet. So we'll see.
All right. So before we sign off, I believe we do have some feedback on our previous episodes, right?
Yeah, so we got a little bit of feedback on our Baron and Luthien episode. I believe it was part 2 of Baron and Luthien. My friend Tammy said, "Bravo, gentlemen, another wonderful episode. I totally need to start making notes because I think of things I want to say, and by the end of the episodes, I've forgotten half of them. So one thing I wanted to say was that I love the recurring motif of people finding and rescuing their friends by singing. Luthien does it here, Fingon did it with Maedhros, and much later Sam sings and finds Frodo in the tower. And of course, music is such a big motif throughout all the stories, but I love the singing rescue especially." And then she says, "FYI, every time y'all say doom, know that there's a lady in South Carolina also chiming with doom. And I bet I'm not the only one."
Nice.
And then on our reading day episode, I didn't copy her whole story, but I guess Alex Murray, one of our panelists, she works at a bookstore and encountered a gentleman, I guess, who didn't have kind words to say about Tolkien. But she said in response to that, "I was genuinely pleased to hear that you 3 gentlemen read your favorite quotes of this year after hearing a very disrespectful take on our beloved professor. Tolkien's writings and world building are fertile soil for communities that span generations and location. Keep up the good work." And I think she also said she did recommend the podcast or spoke to somebody who listens to the podcast as well. So
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And there were people even in Tolkien's day who, were not fans of his book. And I loved his response, his kind of snide response to that in the preface to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, where he basically says, I don't like their books either.
Yeah.
But yeah, we always love getting feedback. So please keep it coming, guys. But that's it for this episode of The Secrets of Middle-earth. We'd like to take a moment to thank our great patrons who make this show possible, including Chris N., Bradley J., Cynthia A., Ryan N., and Rebecca Z. Their generous donations help us to continue to create The Secrets of Middle-earth and all the shows here at StarQuest. You can join them at sqpn.com/give. Now, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What do you think of the Nir Naiath Arnoediad? Can you say that out loud 5 times fast? You can let us know on our Facebook page, on X, or by sending us an email at middleearth@sqpn.com. You can leave a comment on YouTube or visit our channel on the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. And join us next time when we will be talking about the dragons of Middle-earth. And until... just in time for St. George's Day, hopefully. But until then, Pat Mason, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And Jeff Haecker, thank you as well.
Thanks, Thomas.
And until next time, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Star Wars. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Wars.